Beneath the ash of old wars, there are shadows that never faded. Maps erased, files burned, testimonies silenced, and yet fragments still drift like smoke through the corridors of memory. Imagine vaults sealed in darkness, where words written in the margins whisper of vanished convoys, ghost prisons, and cargo never meant to reach its port. What lingers in these forgotten pages is not victory or defeat, but the uneasy silence of truths buried under flags and speeches. The stories left behind were never written for public eyes. They were carved in the language of secrecy, where loyalty was tested and betrayal carried no name. Here, in the spaces between official history and suppressed memory, lies a labyrinth of unanswered questions. Not the tale of what was won or lost, but of what was hidden, smuggled into oblivion, and left to echo beneath the cold weight of silence. Chapter 1. The Forgotten Convoy to Murmansk. In the long winter of 1942, the Barents Sea swallowed men and ships without remorse. Convoy PQ-17 left the harbour of Reykjavik on 27th June under a veil of secrecy. 35 merchant vessels flanked by a thin escort of destroyers, corvettes, and anti-aircraft trawlers. Officially, their mission was simple: deliver tanks, aircraft, and raw materials to the Soviet port of Arkhangelsk in support of Stalin's bleeding front. Unofficially, according to fragments of Admiralty files labelled Most Secret, Harpoon Black, a portion of that cargo held something more delicate than fuel and ammunition. Buried inside the holds of at least 4 freighters were sealed containers bearing unfamiliar markings. Not standard War Department issue, but crates addressed to Research Section, Ministry of Supply, Restricted Transit. Witnesses later recalled the peculiar orders regarding these vessels. Captains warned not to open hatches under penalty of court-martial. Escorts instructed to keep them under constant watch, even during storms. The convoy was shadowed by the Luftwaffe and Wolfpacks within hours of departure. It was always dangerous to run supplies through Arctic waters, but the fear surrounding PQ-17 seemed heightened, as though the Admiralty anticipated disaster. On 4th of July, with the convoy north of Norway, the order was transmitted. Surviving logs reveal it came in the dead of night. Signed First Sea Lord and bearing the operation code Scatter. Merchant captains were instructed to abandon their protective screen and proceed independently to Murmansk. Official histories claim that faulty intelligence of the battleship Tirpitz caused this catastrophic decision. Yet among intercepted German signals later examined at Bletchley Park, no such deployment order was ever confirmed. Instead, a secondary transmission, marked Harpoon Black, directed specific freighters to break formation and head eastward at full steam under radio silence. One of these, the American-flagged Troubadour, was last sighted pushing into a fog bank near Bear Island, guarded not by Royal Navy destroyers, but by 2 unmarked vessels painted in dull grey. Troubadour was never seen again. Its name disappeared quietly from convoy rolls by 1943, erased as if it had never existed. Survivor testimonies are scattered but chilling. Chief Engineer William Rudd of the Liberty ship, Samuel Chase, later recounted under oath in a 1946 closed Admiralty inquiry that his captain received conflicting orders on the night of 4th July. Scatter from the main body, but simultaneously maintain formation with special cargo carriers. When Rudd pressed his captain for clarification, he was told simply, "These aren't our orders. They come from higher than the Admiralty." Other witnesses described merchantmen being approached at night by fast torpedo boats flying no ensign, delivering sealed pouches and signaling for immediate course changes. Sailors believed they were being used as bait, decoys meant to draw German U-boats while something more valuable slipped away beneath the Arctic fog. By 10th of July, the convoy was a massacre. 24 of the 35 ships were destroyed by aircraft or submarine attack, with more than 150 men lost to the freezing waters. Yet among the sunken wrecks catalogued later by Royal Navy divers, none corresponded to the 4 freighters identified in Harpoon Black orders. Troubadour, along with the freighters St. Elwyn, Dorrington Court, and the Soviet-flagged Molotovsk, had simply vanished. Admiralty communique listed them as sunk under enemy action, but no wrecks, lifeboats, or debris fields were ever confirmed. Insurance claims were quietly settled, logs rewritten, and by 1947 all mention of Harpoon Black had been scrubbed from official records. The trail resumes in unexpected places. A declassified 1952 CIA memorandum, titled Soviet Naval Technical Progress Source Evaluation, mentions experimental radar jamming equipment appearing at Soviet test ranges 2 years earlier than previously thought possible. It references Arctic transit of Western material, summer 1942, and notes that US Navy officers privately expressed disbelief at the speed of Soviet electronic warfare development. Meanwhile, Soviet KGB files captured after 1991 contained stray notes on Murmansk transfer, components incomplete, some shipment intercepted or lost at sea. This suggests that whatever the crates carried, only part reached Soviet hands. The remainder may have been diverted, possibly to secret British or American programs. Where did those missing ships truly go? Some maritime historians point to sonar anomalies recorded off the coast of Novaya Zemlya, consistent with scuttled hulls resting at extreme depths. Divers contracted in the 1970s by the Soviet Navy reported metallic wreckage in excess of expected tonnage, but their reports were sealed as state secrets. Others argue that at least one freighter broke through and docked at a secluded fjord under escort, offloading its cargo for immediate overland transfer. The Soviet rail network was known to have received unusual heavy shipments at Murmansk in late July 1942, though no records specify the contents. In 1965, British journalist Leonard Paget interviewed retired petty officer Samuel Lyne, who served on HMS Keppel during PQ-17. Lyne recalled seeing men in civilian suits aboard certain freighters before departure, speaking neither English nor Russian, but some clipped European tongue. He later recognized similar accents among technicians in the US rocket program when visiting America years later. "I swear those men I saw in Reykjavik ended up in White Sands," Lyne said. His claims were dismissed as senility at the time. The legacy of PQ-17 remains one of tragedy, yet within the carnage lies a darker silence. The names of missing ships erased from naval rolls, the vanished cargo marked Harpoon Black, and the inexplicable technological leaps in Soviet radar all suggest a cover operation hidden inside a disaster. If the goal was to smuggle technology under the chaos of battle, then the sacrifice of men and ships may have been a calculated diversion. In the cold calculus of total war, expendable convoys could cloak the movement of something judged too valuable to risk by conventional channels. No official body has ever acknowledged these possibilities. The Ministry of Defense continues to cite enemy action as the sole cause of PQ-17's losses, and American archives remain heavily redacted when requests touch on convoy records. Yet fragments endure, misfiled signals, sailors' testimonies, and curious silences in shipping ledgers. Together, they sketch the outline of an operation that slipped between the cracks of history, buried in Arctic ice. In the waters north of Norway, beneath storms and silence, the truth of PQ-17 lingers like the wrecks themselves, broken, scattered, and never fully recovered. Chapter 2: Operation Eclipse and the Hidden Reich. When the guns fell silent over Berlin in May 1945, the Allied occupation appeared to the world as a carefully orchestrated transition from war to reconstruction. Yet behind the neat language of proclamations and the public fanfare of surrender, Operation Eclipse concealed darker directives. Officially drafted as the British-American plan for dividing Germany and establishing military governance, Eclipse contained annexes marked Most Secret, circulated only to senior officers with direct handling instructions. These annexes were not about food rationing or law enforcement. They concerned names, laboratories, and vaults hidden deep within the ruins of the Reich. Among the most chilling fragments to survive is an order issued on 21 April 1945 by SHAF, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, codename Eclipse Z. It called for special teams to penetrate Thuringia, Bavaria and Saxony ahead of Soviet advances, securing priority individuals and technical assets. While the public later learned of Operation Paperclip, which sanitized the story of German rocket scientists brought to the United States, Eclipse Z described targets beyond Werner von Braun's circle at Peenemünde, notes, reference facilities at Ohrdruf, Weida and Jonastal, sites already notorious for slave labor and underground construction. The annex demanded seizure of files concerning America bomber, A-10, A-11 configurations, isotope separation research, terms that, at the time, few Allied field officers even understood. Veteran accounts reveal how Eclipse Z played out in the chaos of collapsing Germany. Lieutenant Harold Wexler of the US 83rd Infantry Division later testified in a 1963 oral history that his unit was diverted without explanation toward a rail yard near Gotha. There, under cover of darkness, a heavily guarded train was waiting, its boxcars sealed. The sentries not German but American. Wexler described crates stenciled with the eagle and swastika insignia alongside fresh chalk markings reading, "Property of Schaff, Technical Section." He was ordered at gunpoint by plainclothesmen to turn his platoon away from the rail line. Weeks later, the same rail convoy was seen passing through Antwerp en route to Britain. No manifest was ever released. Meanwhile, Soviet files captured after 1991 offer glimpses of bitter rivalry. NKVD reports from May 1945 complain of Western forces removing materials from Thuringian strongholds under armed escort. One document, filed under Operation Eclipse Anglo-American, laments that uranium ore stockpiles expected by the Soviets were missing or incomplete. Another describes locals witnessing Allied trucks departing from the Jonastal area, where Hitler's regime had forced thousands of prisoners to dig cavernous tunnels, allegedly intended as Führer headquarters, but perhaps equally suited to conceal research facilities. The Soviets found empty halls and scattered blueprints. The rest, it seems, had already moved west. Declassified British War Office files hint at Eclipse Z's chain of custody. In June 1945, memoranda labelled ultra-restricted refer to personnel classified as Category 1B detainees, including SS officers attached to the Reichsforschungsrat, Reich Research Council. These men were not delivered to Nuremberg, but transferred quietly to camps in the American zone. Among the names partially visible in redacted pages are Dr. Kurt Debus, later prominent in NASA's launch operations, and less familiar figures linked to isotope enrichment. Cross-referencing with surviving prisoner lists reveals glaring omissions, men who simply vanished from German records after May 1945. Eyewitness soldiers remembered what official files did not. Corporal Frank Denham of the British 11th Armoured Division recalled his unit's approach to Weimar on 12th of April. He told interviewers decades later of a convoy of lorries leaving the town at night, their cargo tarpaulin covered, guarded by officers speaking not English, but a clipped American dialect. "We were told to let them pass," Denham said. "We thought it was medical supplies until one of the covers slipped. I saw long metallic cylinders, maybe 8 or 10 feet long. Nothing I'd seen before." His account never appeared in official regimental histories. By summer 1945, Eclipse Z disappeared into the fog of post-war bureaucracy. The Allies presented a carefully curated narrative. The occupation was orderly. Paperclip brought over rocket scientists for peaceful research, and Germany's dangerous projects had been destroyed. Yet hints of the Annex's legacy surfaced during the Cold War. In 1948, American intelligence officers briefed Congress on the Soviet long-range bomber program, warning of designs suspiciously similar to those theorized in America bomber projects. British analysts privately questioned how the Soviets obtained such material if Jonastal had been thoroughly secured. Whispers suggested the Soviets had only fragments, enough to alarm, not enough to duplicate. The full archive, some suspected, had crossed the Atlantic under Eclipse Z custody. The secrecy had a human cost. Families of missing German technicians were never given answers. Many assumed their relatives perished in Soviet camps, but fragments in declassified US Army psychological warfare files reveal otherwise. A 1946 report lists special detainees relocated under Eclipse Z to be held incommunicado until deemed exploitable. These individuals were effectively disappeared, stripped of status as prisoners of war, denied Red Cross access. Their existence was buried alongside the documents and crates they represented. As with most operations of shadow war, paper trails end in silence. Schaff's annexes remain heavily redacted even today, entire pages blacked out under national security exemptions. The United States denies that Eclipse Z was ever more than a planning draft. Britain acknowledges Eclipse only in its administrative form. Yet between testimonies of soldiers, fragments of captured Soviet reports, and odd lacunae in prisoner lists, a picture emerges of an operation designed to seize more than victory. It sought control of knowledge, ensuring no rival, not even an ally, could claim the spoils. The occupation of Germany was presented as the first step toward peace, but in the shadows of Operation Eclipse, another truth unfolded. a race for the Reich's most dangerous secrets, fought not with tanks or bombers, but with redacted files, unmarked convoys, and orders whispered under the seal of most secret. What was removed under Eclipse Z remains uncertain. Whether blueprints for long-range bombers, experimental jet engines, or fragments of atomic research, its capture shaped the trajectory of the Cold War. The battle for Berlin ended in May 1945, but the struggle for control of the Reich's hidden knowledge had only begun, sealed in archives that remain closed, their contents locked away under the weight of silence. Chapter 3: The Ghost Prison of Spandau West. The story of Berlin's Spandau. Prison is familiar to students of Cold War history, a fortress-like structure that housed 7 prominent Nazi war criminals under joint Allied guard. It was heavily guarded, carefully regulated, and symbolic of the uneasy cooperation between Britain, France, the United States, and the Soviet Union. But buried beneath the official narrative lies evidence of another facility, one that never appeared on maps and was denied by every government asked. Known in scattered references as Spandau West, it appears to have been constructed in secret in the shattered ruins of Charlottenburg, concealed within a maze of abandoned U-Bahn tunnels and reinforced underground chambers originally built as air raid shelters. Unlike the infamous official Spandau, this prison never hosted public trials. Its prisoners were individuals deemed too sensitive, too dangerous, or too useful to allow into the spotlight of Nuremberg. The first references to Spandau West appear in declassified MI6 cables dated October 1945, describing special detainees extracted from hiding places in Bavaria and Thuringia. These men were not generals or political figures, but engineers, SS technical officers, and research directors connected to Luftwaffe long-range weapons programs. Among them was Dr. Friedrich Stahler, a figure absent from most post-war rosters but mentioned in scattered Reich Ministry of Aviation memos as heading Project Fernfeuer, an experimental initiative exploring high-altitude rocket deployment. According to the cables, Stahler and others were segregated for exploitation and transferred to a West Sector holding installation under British command. No facility in official Berlin matched that description. Yet eyewitnesses from the time remembered strange convoys moving at night through Charlottenburg, canvas-covered lorries escorted by military police, but marked with false insignia. The convoys entered sealed U-Bahn tunnels at Ernst-Reuter-Platz and were never seen again. Local civilians whispered of activity beneath their feet long after the war. Residents reported sudden blackouts in entire blocks coinciding with midnight movements of trucks and armed guards. A shopkeeper on Otto Sur Allee told Soviet investigators in 1947 that she frequently saw exhausted men in soiled uniforms march down side stairwells into tunnel entrances, watched over by British soldiers carrying Sten guns. When asked later by Allied authorities, she retracted her statement, though neighbors claimed she was visited by intelligence officers days before. Soviet military administrators filed repeated complaints about unacknowledged detention sites in the British sector, but their protests were dismissed. Western officials insisted only the official Spandau existed, housing a handful of well-known war criminals under four-power control. The rest, they said, was rumor and propaganda. Yet traces of Spandau West persist in documents that slipped through the cracks of secrecy. A declassified CIA memorandum from 1952 refers to interrogations conducted at the Berlin West Holding Complex, where technical officers were questioned on jet propulsion and guidance systems. The document does not use the name Spandau West, but the descriptions of location, below ground, reinforced chambers, Charlottenburg vicinity, fit precisely with civilian reports. Moreover, the memo notes that detainees were never transferred to Nuremberg or officially recorded as prisoners of war. Instead, they were listed as displaced persons under restricted custody, a bureaucratic sleight of hand that kept them invisible to the Red Cross and international monitors. The Soviet archives tell their own story. An NKVD file captured after 1991 includes a translated British cable intercepted in late 1946, in which an officer complains about overcrowding at West Holding, current total exceeding 32 technicals. Another Soviet note records surveillance of Allied convoys delivering heavy electrical equipment into tunnels near Ernst-Reuter-Platz, suggesting the installation was outfitted with advanced communication and interrogation facilities. When Soviet inspectors pressed for access, They were told the area was an ammunition dump, yet no explosions or fires were ever reported in the vicinity, despite multiple Allied depots elsewhere suffering accidents during that period. What became of the detainees? Testimonies from former British intelligence officers suggest some were quietly transferred to the United States under the broader umbrella of paperclip. Others may have been interrogated until they outlived their usefulness, then disappeared. No graves, no records, no Red Cross reports. A former American counterintelligence agent, interviewed anonymously in the 1970s, claimed that several detainees were not wanted for trials because their testimony would have implicated Allied corporations that had funded or supplied Nazi projects. According to him, the very existence of Spandau West was designed to ensure silence, not only of the prisoners, but of the inconvenient truths they carried. Occasionally, fragments of human voices reached through the decades. In 1963, an elderly German woman contacted a Berlin newspaper, insisting that her brother, an aeronautical engineer, had been captured near Munich in May 1945 and vanished. She received a single postcard in the summer of 1946, written in his hand, describing life in the underground barracks near Spandau. The postcard bore no official postmark and arrived folded into a British military envelope. After that, nothing. Her letter to the newspaper was never published, and the woman herself reportedly withdrew the claim under pressure from officials. The postcard vanished into private archives, resurfacing only in 2001 when her grandson donated it to a local historical society. Its authenticity has never been disputed. The ghost prison never appeared in Allied communiques, and after the Cold War ended, the governments involved continued to deny its existence. Yet the convergence of testimony, civilians, soldiers, Soviet intelligence, and stray official documents paints a picture too consistent to dismiss. Beneath Berlin's streets, hidden among bombed tunnels and forgotten stairwells, men once held in silence may have lived and died, their knowledge siphoned off for the Cold War struggle. Their absence from the grand stage of Nuremberg was not coincidence but strategy. To expose them, and what they knew, would have been to expose uncomfortable truths about how closely the victors studied, adapted, and sometimes concealed the work of the defeated. Today, nothing remains of Spandau West but bricked-up tunnel entrances and the silence of archives. The U-Bahn tunnels in Charlottenburg have long since been cleared, their walls lined with modern cables and their spaces converted to storage. Yet some old Berliners still whisper of the nights when armed guards patrolled side streets, and of muffled cries that echoed faintly from beneath the pavement. Officially, those sounds never existed. Unofficially, they belong to the story of a prison that was never meant to be remembered. A black site buried in the rubble of Berlin, its prisoners erased as efficiently as the history that might have revealed them. Chapter 4. The Adriatic Submarine Mystery. In the autumn of 1944, as the German front in the Balkans collapsed under pressure from advancing partisans and Soviet units, the Adriatic Sea became a final lifeline for retreating forces. Among the vessels tasked with these desperate missions was a Type WWII U-boat, the Kriegsmarine's most advanced submarine, said to have slipped out of Polar Naval Base in late October under orders marked Kriegsmarine Sonderauftrag, Black Neptune. Its mission remains unclear. Official Allied naval records claim the boat was intercepted and destroyed by depth charges near Trieste, but no wreckage, oil slick, or debris was ever recovered. For decades, its disappearance was dismissed as a routine wartime loss. Yet fragmentary documents and scattered eyewitness accounts suggest the submarine's voyage was no ordinary patrol. It may have carried not only fleeing officers, but sealed cargo that drew the interest of both Allied intelligence and Soviet investigators for decades afterward. The Type WWII was revolutionary, the first true submarine capable of long-duration submerged operations. Its appearance in the Adriatic, where only coastal U-boats usually operated, immediately raised suspicions among Allied signals officers. A decrypted Enigma intercept from 19th October 1944 refers cryptically to Unit 21, proceeding with Neptune material, utmost secrecy, surviving. Logs of the Royal Navy's 10th submarine. Flotilla show patrol lines concentrated along the Adriatic coast during those same days, suggesting British command believed something unusual was moving through the area. An after-action report by HMS Upholder describes sonar contact with a large submerged vessel, probable Type WWII. But after dropping a pattern of depth charges, no wreck was found. Instead, the sea returned to silence, leaving only speculation of what had slipped away in the depths. Yugoslav partisan sources add another layer to the mystery. Reports filed in November 1944 describe nocturnal landings along isolated coves near Rovinj and Pula, where villagers claim to have seen German sailors unloading heavy crates under the cover of darkness. One partisan unit reported engaging a small German detachment near Warsaw, capturing documents referring to Case Neptune and priority transfer do not delay. The documents vanished into OSS custody after the war. Years later, declassified OSS memos referenced Neptune cargo as potentially related to nuclear research components, though the wording remained deliberately vague. The suggestion that the submarine carried materials linked to uranium refinement or reactor design has long fueled speculation, especially since German efforts in this field remain murky, with evidence of multiple parallel programs operating in fragmented secrecy. Soviet files seized after the Cold War reinforce the sense of something valuable lost beneath the Adriatic. NKVD naval reports from early 1945 detail persistent operations in the Istrian coastal sector, including the deployment of deep-sea divers to search suspected wreck sites. Entire stretches of seabed were cordoned off as hazard zones, with Soviet patrol boats barring even local fishermen from entering. One file notes potential capture of strategic cargo by Western powers before Red Fleet arrival. This admission hints that the Allies may have intercepted the submarine or its crew before the Soviets could secure the cargo, yet no Allied record openly acknowledges such a capture, leaving the fate of both vessel and contents obscured behind layers of secrecy. Rumors among former German naval officers point to deliberate scuttling. In post-war interviews, survivors of the U-boat fleet recalled hearing of a boat designated U-35 or U-35 diverted south in October 1944 with orders to destroy its cargo rather than risk capture. If true, the wreck might still rest intact on the seabed, its hold sealed. In the 1970s, NATO reconnaissance divers conducted covert sonar sweeps off the Istrian coast. Reports leaked decades later describe anomalous returns consistent with hull sections of advanced U-boat type. Though the dives were abruptly halted and findings were classified, the Italian Navy, conducting unrelated exercises in the 1980s, also logged sonar contacts of unusually large dimensions near the Dalmatian Islands, but was instructed to cease investigations. Each time the wreck drew near discovery, official silence descended. Civilian divers too have told stories. In 1993, a Croatian salvage diver, exploring near Lošinj, claimed to have found twisted steel plating and a collapsed conning tower at depths exceeding 100 meters. He reported seeing stenciled German markings and, most disturbingly, the outline of sealed metal containers still lashed to the deck. Before he could return with proper equipment, the area was abruptly declared a restricted military zone. He never dived there again. His account, though never verified, echoes reports stretching back decades. A wreck hidden in plain sight, guarded not by rust but by deliberate obfuscation. Why the secrecy? Theories vary. Some believe the submarine carried looted gold or art bound for sympathetic contacts in neutral countries. Others point to technological cargo, blueprints, prototypes, or even nuclear material that both East and West sought desperately as the Cold War loomed. The consistent reference to Neptune cargo in OSS and Soviet files suggests something beyond treasure. A strategic asset considered dangerous if lost to rivals. The absence of any confirmed wreck, despite decades of sonar surveys, fuels suspicions that the boat may not lie at the bottom of the Adriatic at all. Instead, it may have been intercepted, its crew and cargo quietly absorbed into Allied custody, its existence erased from naval rolls. A final clue lies in Italian naval. Archives opened briefly in 2002. Among routine patrol reports from 1944 was an entry describing a foreign submarine escorted into Taranto harbour under heavy guard. On 2 November 1944, the report noted that the vessel was removed within days, towed under secrecy, and never returned. No further mention appears in Italian files. Cross-checking with British records for that week reveals missing entries in convoy logs and sudden unexplained troop movements. If the submarine was indeed captured intact, it may have been spirited away to Allied ports for examination, its crew disappearing into the shadows of intelligence interrogations. Today, the Adriatic holds its silence, Fishermen still tell stories of steel shadows beneath the waves, and divers whisper of sonar readings abruptly classified by naval authorities. The submarine's name remains unknown, its number erased, its fate unresolved. Whether it lies broken on the seabed, hidden in Allied archives, or dismantled in some forgotten dry dock, the mystery persists. For those who study it, the Adriatic submarine is less a wreck than a symbol, a reminder of how much of the Second World War's ending was not about peace, but about the quiet, ruthless race to control what the Reich left behind. The missing boat, the missing cargo, and the silence that followed are not just maritime mysteries, but fragments of a shadow war that never officially began, yet shaped the decades to come. Chapter 5: The Warsaw Ciphers and Silent Betrayal. In the summer of 1944, as the Red Army advanced toward the Vistula, the Polish Home Army launched its desperate uprising in Warsaw. For 63 days, resistance fighters held out against overwhelming German firepower, believing relief would come from the east or the skies above. What the world remembers is the tragedy: a city in ruins, its people slaughtered, and an uprising left to die. What remains buried in classified files, however, is the role of intercepted German cipher traffic and the strange fate of Enigma fragments captured by the Polish underground. Newly surfaced memoranda suggest that in the midst of battle, the Home Army secured priceless code material from retreating Wehrmacht units, only for these assets to vanish into Western hands, while Soviet forces withheld assistance. The story is less one of military defeat than of betrayal encoded in silence. The first hint lies in an OSS field report dated 14th August 1944, marked Special Source Warsaw. It notes that partisan units captured cipher tables and rotor fragments from enemy courier vehicle near Okęcie. Witnesses within the resistance later described seizing a disabled staff car, its driver killed, its contents including not only Enigma parts but current-day key sheets. These were rushed through underground channels in hopes of reaching Soviet command, yet courier routes intended for the east were intercepted. According to fragmentary SOE files released in the 1970s, British agents operating under codenames Harp and Cobalt made contact with Home Army couriers, promising to relay the material to Moscow. The files never arrived. Soviet records, meanwhile, make no mention of receiving them. What was lost to Warsaw may have been diverted elsewhere. The absence of Allied support haunted the uprising. Polish radio operators sent urgent requests for airdrops, citing precise Wehrmacht troop movements decrypted from the captured keys. RAF flights circled but delivered little. One squadron commander, in a declassified 1962 interview, confessed that missions over Warsaw were restricted by higher directive, their payloads rerouted towards Soviet-designated zones rather than the insurgents. Churchill's War Cabinet minutes from August 1944 remain heavily redacted, entire sections blacked out. Those fragments that survive record discussions of safeguarding ultra sources at all costs. To reveal that the Allies possessed current Enigma settings, courtesy of Polish fighters, might have risked compromising Bletchley Park's operations. Better, it seems, to let Warsaw burn than to confirm the existence of intelligence channels already strained by Soviet mistrust. Testimonies from surviving Home Army couriers reinforce this shadowed narrative. Jan Nowicki, interviewed secretly in 1959, described meeting two English-speaking operatives in civilian dress near Piotrków. They carried wireless sets of unfamiliar make and spoke in clipped tones, identifying themselves only by code names. He handed over the Enigma fragments, believing they would be flown directly to Moscow. "We thought we had delivered victory," Nowicki recalled. Instead, nothing changed. The Russians sat idle across the river. His testimony was suppressed until decades later, when Polish émigré groups published fragments in underground journals. No official Western source ever confirmed or denied the encounter. Soviet archives add bitter irony. An NKVD memorandum from 5 September 1944 complains of Anglo interference with partisan transmissions and accuses British agents of diverting intelligence for exclusive Western use. The file further notes that Soviet high command used the absence of proof as justification for withholding full support to the uprising, dismissing Polish reports as unverified. In effect, the chain of betrayal looped on itself. Intelligence captured at great cost in Warsaw never reached Moscow, allowing the Soviets to stand aside, while London and Washington quietly exploited the gains for their own purposes. The men and women who fought in Warsaw became pawns in a silent game of code and deception. The aftermath offers further clues. By December 1944, Bletchley Park analysts had achieved sudden breakthroughs against German army ciphers previously considered resilient. Internal memos cite unexpectedly precise rotor sequences and operator tables acquired through field sources. Though never explicitly linked to Warsaw, the timing aligns perfectly with the uprising's collapse. In the same period, OSS headquarters circulated technical notes describing field Enigma rotors in surprisingly good condition, without explaining their provenance. The coincidence is difficult to ignore. Warsaw's loss may have directly fueled Allied cryptographic advances, even as its people were abandoned. The moral weight of this betrayal has echoed through decades of silence. Survivors of the uprising often insisted that they had been sacrificed not for lack of resources, but for political calculation. The cipher fragments they seized should have been their shield. Instead, they became bargaining chips in a larger struggle between allies already preparing for the post-war order. To admit this publicly would have stained the triumphalist narrative of unity against fascism. So the files were buried, the couriers forgotten, and the ashes of Warsaw left as a symbol without explanation. In the 1990s, after the Cold War ended, fragments of Churchill's War Cabinet records were released under pressure from historians. Even then, critical passages remain classified. Yet one chilling note scribbled in the margin of a ministerial briefing dated 22nd August 1944 survives. Cipher gain invaluable, cannot risk compromise for Warsaw. No context, no signature, just a sentence that speaks volumes. It confirms what survivors long suspected. The sacrifice was deliberate. Today, the Warsaw ciphers remain a case study in the cruelty of strategic calculation. The Home Army risked everything to seize the tools of enemy communication, hoping to change the course of battle. Instead, their victory became their doom. The Allies they trusted diverted their prize. The Soviets they expected stood idle, and the city they fought to free was left to be erased. In the rubble, betrayal was not shouted but encrypted. Silent, cold, and efficient, like the ciphers themselves. The truth, glimpsed only in fragments, is that Warsaw's fall was not merely the consequence of overwhelming German firepower. It was the result of choices made in shadowed rooms, where codes mattered more than lives, and secrecy weighed heavier than freedom. And when the archives close again, when the corridors of secrecy shut their iron doors, what remains is not certainty, but the pulse of doubt. For in every silence, there lingers the question of what else lies buried. What hidden hands redirected events? What ghosts still walk unacknowledged beneath the ruins of forgotten wars? We are left only with fragments, each one a shard of a puzzle too dangerous to complete. Perhaps the true history was never written for us at all, but locked away, parceled out in whispers, leaving us to stare at the absence and wonder. For the most unsettling truth is not what we know, it is what we are never permitted to know, and the haunting knowledge that some secrets were designed never to surface. The echoes remain, cold and unfinished, in the silence between what is told and what is concealed.